So thank you all for sticking around for the last talk. I, at least personally, appreciate it. And I'm really excited to be back speaking at my second EnthusiastiCon. So my name is Carolyn, and I'm a front-end developer based here in Berlin. And today I'm going to talk to you about how technologies like artificial intelligence or AI and machine learning are affecting modern journalism and reporting. And I'm particularly enthusiastic about this topic because I actually used to be a journalist myself. So it sounds really cheesy, but transitioning from print journalism to software development made me realize all of the possibilities that technology can unlock when it comes to the way we think about our news cycle. And I gravitated towards AI and machine learning because what I found was just really, really cool. Or at least I think so. Many journalists, however, really are afraid of this technology. And I get it. They don't want their jobs to become obsolete. But instead of fearing it, I think that journalists should be learning it and understanding it, because these technologies can actually empower journalists to be more thorough and more data-driven and allow them to better report on our increasingly globalized and information-rich world. So through software and natural language processing, computers could actually take over the tasks that, while they're important, seem pretty mundane to humans. So think analyzing massive amounts of data or fact-checking, making rough cuts of videos, etc. Most of the research that I've done around the topic of journalism and AI involves a lot of ethics and the ethics of using this technology in reporting. Spoiler alert, what I found is pretty cringeworthy, but that's not what I want to focus on for today. Although if you want to talk about it later, I'm totally happy to do that. Today I want to embody the spirit of this event and especially since it's the end of the day, and focus on some of at least my favorite use cases when it comes to using these technologies. So let's start with bots. So the Washington Post, for example, has a robot reporting program called Heliograph, or I might be saying that wrong, Heliograph, I'm not sure. I'll say Heliograph. In its first year, it produced around 850 articles and earned the Post an award for its excellent use of bots in the 2016 US election coverage. The Heliograph covers a range of topics from the Rio Olympics, where it created 300 short snippets and alerts for the reporters there. It covers local high school football games, which if you're not from the US, high school sports are a big deal. I'm not really sure why. And it also continues to dabble in election day coverage, particularly for congressional and other races. Along with reporting, the Heliograph can also write its own tweets for the topics that it reports on, and it can alert reporters when there's trends in finance or big data so that they can be the first to report on it. Forbes also has a bot, but it took a slightly different approach. So last year, they launched a brand new website that was powered by a content management system that they named Birdie, after their founder, BC Forbes. So as an AI publishing platform, Birdie is designed specifically for their in-house newsroom and partners. It provides real-time trending topics to cover. It can recommend ways to make your headlines more compelling for readers. And it can also suggest relevant imagery to add to your stories. The LA Times also does a lot of really compelling work with AI. For instance, they have a thing called QuakeBot. And so back in 2014, a huge earthquake hit the city. And the LA Times was the first to report on it. Basically because the earthquake happened, the reporter woke up, he went to his computer, and there was already an article there waiting for him. So it was up within 3 minutes of the earthquake happening. And the way it works is that whenever there's an alert that comes from the US Geological Survey about an earthquake above a certain size threshold, QuakeBot is programmed to extract the relevant data from the report and plug it into a pre-written template. That template is then uploaded to their CMS, and where it'll be reviewed and published by a human editor. While the code isn't open source, the creator of QuakeBot wrote this gist about how it works, including a bunch of code samples. The LA Times also uses a robot that collects all the information on all of the homicides committed in Los Angeles. In their reports, it includes a ton of data like the victim's gender and race, the cause of death, officer involvement, neighborhood, the year of death, and creates this kind of interactive map. The last of the bots comes from The Guardian Australia. They have an automated system called ReporterMate, which published its first article earlier this year in February. It basically works the same as the other bots. It's not really anything special. But what makes it a little bit special is that it's actually open source. So if you want to look into some, I think it's Python code and learn how to make your own bot, you can do that. But bots aren't the only thing that AI can do for journalism. It can also dissect data sets, it can predict trends and automate tasks. And we saw this with ProPublica and their analysis of what various members of the US Congress talk about. So they did this by taking thousands of press releases over the course of 2 years, and they trained a computer model to extract what phrases each individual Congress member was using most frequently. That way they could inform the constituents of like what these people, at least were, whether or not they said they care about it, what they were actually talking about most of the time. BuzzFeed also trained a computer, but for a very different purpose. They focused on finding and tracking secret spy planes. So the computer used a machine learning algorithm sift for planes with flight patterns that resembled those from the FBI or the Department of Homeland Security in the US. And this technology allowed them to report on a lot of really cool topics, like how US Marshals hunted down drug cartel kingpins in Mexico, how a military contractor that tracks terrorists in Africa was actually flying over US cities, and other topics around aerial surveillance in general. On the other hand, the New York Times uses these technologies for moderating comments on their articles. So back in 2017, only 10% of the Times' articles were open to comments. And even with that small of a percentage, they still had a desk of moderators that would go through 11,000 comments per day. So they wanted to turn to AI to help automate that. They're using a tool called Perspective. It's from Alphabet's tech incubator, and to evaluate the comments at bulk and at scale. Then previously, they also implemented the Coral Project's Talk tool, which also utilizes the Perspective API to tackle toxic comments that are happening and try to fight that. And something kind of in between, and maybe the one that I'm at least most excited about, is a concept from Al Jazeera. So last year at Al Jazeera's Future of Media Leaders Summit, there were discussions around robot reporters deploying from drones in war zones. And the idea is that the drone can fly into an area that's considered dangerous ground. It might be kind of hard to see, but it's a simulation. And the drone then deploys a robot that works for Al Jazeera. And in this example, they show the robot like evaluating if it's a bad situation or not. It'll dodge a sniper attack. And they note that human reporters aren't typically trained for these types of environments, and that there's also a lot of ethical implications of sending civilians into a very hostile situation. So this might just be the answer. Okay, so what does AI mean for the future of journalists? So I don't really have time to dig too deeply into this, but in the true spirit of technology, the future's pretty open right now. So, but a convincing statistic is that the Associated Press estimates that AI helps free up about 20% of the time that their reporters, just in general, their time. And it gives them more time to focus on storytelling rather than mundane tasks like fact-checking or kind of the initial research. This percentage is only going to increase, I think, with the advancements of these technologies. And I at least choose to be optimistic. And I believe that this will enable us to craft higher quality journalism if used correctly. But again, a different conversation. So very quickly, before I get off the stage, I just want to end on some final notes. So think twice when you're reading the news, because it's good to be aware that you might be reading a story generated from a bot or an algorithm or a human. They all are biased in their own different ways. If you're in a position to use artificial intelligence and machine learning to convey a message, make sure that you ask questions and you understand where that data is coming from, as well as how it's being prioritized. And finally, just keep looking out. There's a lot of really cool things that are in the work in this space, and it affects you as maybe someone who consumes the news or maybe someone who's influencing it. So that's all I have. Thank you.